I'm Lindsay. I'm the founder and director of Canny Comms. This is a whistle-stop tour of bidding, really, and bidding into defence. It is designed to be totally accessible, so I'm going to avoid jargon where possible, which, if you like, is more of a challenge than not, as you know, those people who've been doing this a bit more often. And it is a beginner's guide. It's supposed to be for people who've not done this before, so sorry if any of it's a bit samey for those who have done it, but hopefully you'll pick up something as we go through. Why am I talking to you? I've had a bit of a background in defence, but I'm actually coming at this from a comms perspective, which gives me a slightly different perspective on bid writing and bidding. Canny Comms is now, we provide an end-to-end service of helping people commercialise and exploit their technology. So right from the beginning to the end, and the technology strategy and communications that goes through that process is proving to be quite popular because it brings it all together. So it brings bidding and comms and marketing and technology all together to make it more successful. So I come at it from a potentially slightly different background. But defence is definitely where I've come from, and worked for lots of different companies, either in-house or since with Canny Comms. So that's a bit about me and why I'm talking to you about it. Let's talk about, first of all, how do you think you win work, and then how do you really win work? So at the moment, you probably think, potentially, yeah, find an opportunity, download some documents, write an awesome bid, and submit it, and you're going to win. Like, if you write a great bid, that will be fine. Great, debatable, what's the definition of that? But actually, we're going to talk a little bit more about the fact it's not just about the bid document, it's everything around it. Is what you actually win on, and it's all of that prep work beforehand which will make your bid successful and make it a very easy thing to write. So it is about great writing, but it isn't just about that. So we're going to have a little step through from some of these things about getting to know your audience a little bit better and their motivations, also fundamentally what the company wants and what you want to get out of this, and where you are in which stage you're at. Then we're going to talk about telling stories, which sounds terribly fluffy, but I promise it's a human process, this selling thing. So let's talk about that, and hopefully I'll win you over to taking that approach. And then the top tips bit is really the stuff we repeat, the things we say on repeat to all of our clients. I thought it'd be silly not to share some of that. What do we say most? What do people forget most? And then we're going to talk a little bit more about compliance and why you absolutely don't want to give them any reason to say no, because that would be silly after you've written this wonderful thing. Now, I've got 15 minutes as well, so forgive the top level approach, but let's talk about your audience first. And the most important thing here is about motivations and the fact that they are different. So this isn't necessarily an exhaustive list of all the people you need to consider, but it's talking about how MOD procurement is going to have a slightly different approach from your end user. There's levels within that end user between capability and acquisition, and then also the soldier that actually uses it at the end. Do you understand all of both of those motivations? Do you understand all the different bits of the MOD? Probably not, and you need to get to grips with it in order to understand which bit is best to approach depending on where you are as a company, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And then also you've got the primes. Many of the primes hold the frameworks or look after managing those contracts, or you need to bid to or with them. So it's very much about understanding them and potential partners in talking in their language and understanding their problems too. So it's not one customer. You're not going into defence as a complete thing and one requirement. There's potentially a single requirement, but there will be multiple motivations and challenges within that. And if you can unpick that and find your place in it, that's the first part in understanding how you're going to bid and how you're going to solve their problems. The next thing is understanding where you are on your journey. So whether that's a product, a service, or a technology, if you like, from scratch, if you're very early on. If you know where you are, it'll start to unpick what you want, what work you want, and also which bit of the MOD is going to give that to you. So you might well be doing something already in another industry. And you would think, oh, there's a requirement for this widget that I sell it. Sorry, forgive the example. I sell this widget over here in the shipping industry, easily transferable to the Royal Navy. I'll sell it into them, no problem, or into BAE Systems or one of the other shipbuilders. So I'll just submit that, fine. But actually, you might have to come back to an earlier TRL level, technology readiness level, in order to prove it in a defence application, because it's very unlikely that you've been throwing bombs at it so far. That's not something you will have done in your normal life, or there might be other sensors and systems that it won't have integrated in the civilian environment, and you have to prove it could do that first. So if you take a really hard look at where you are and where you want to be, then you'll be very clear about which bit of the MOD you need to bid into and why you're bidding. When you've got to that point, you hopefully will have quite a good idea as to whether it's a good idea to bid or not. So can you really solve their problem? And is this something you really want to put time and resource in? People quite often will call that a bid, no bid process. But basically it's making a sensible decision as to whether you want to put all the time and effort, therefore, into bidding. Let's talk about stories. If you definitely worth bidding, you've got their perfect solution, you just need to explain that to them. Why it's important to put it into a story is really that it is still very much a human process buying things. They might have scorecards to map out against, and they might want to rank you, but ultimately you have to make it very easy for them to do that. And if you take a story approach, then they can tick through as they go, and you're presenting all the right information to be easily found. So forgive me for the example, and I don't know whether I'm going to age myself or not in this, but consider the Jungle Book. I'm hoping most people may have read the Jungle Book. I have small children and I seem to be reading on repeat at the moment. So we have a problem. We meet our character. Mowgli's in the jungle. He's 10 years old. He's been brought up by the wolf pack, I think, and he's been having a lovely time. However, there's now a bit of a problem. There's a man-eating tiger that's going to get him if he doesn't go and move back to the man village. So you've driven some personality and some character to it. You presented the problem. Someone's going to eat him. He has to get out of the jungle. And the bits after that rise up and up as he goes through many challenges as to whether he's going to get out of the jungle or not before the tiger can eat him. The turning point is when the tiger is chased out of the jungle with a stick of fire tied to his tail, and he's no longer a problem, apparently. And there's a resolution, at which point everything starts to fall into place. He then sees a lovely girl by the river, and he ends up back in the man village, and everything's okay, and it's all lovely, and everybody's friends. Super. How does that children's story apply to what you want to talk about? Well, ultimately, first and foremost, build the character. That's your concept. This is your initial upfront idea, and there's huge amounts of value in that. If you can succinctly take some time to tell this, not the full story of your company, but understand why what you do is important and what you're proposing to them and why it's going to solve some of their problems in a short, snappy way, you will get them hooked. Then you're going to look at the requirement, the problem that they need to solve. And that picture builds. So you're looking at your requirement, you're then looking at the challenges around delivering that requirement, some of the existing technology, why it's not working, some of the other options in terms of technology or products. So, and you forgive me because I'll keep going back to technology, but it is also about product services. It works in the same way. But what are the other solutions? So it's not just a case of, well, I supply these boots, they're fantastic, and somebody else supplies some boots. Are they also looking at sandals? Terrible example, but it's looking at the other alternatives. It might be a case you do a film on electro-optics or something like that, but the current capability is more of a physical cover or something, and you have to look at all those other comparables and what you might be able to replace and the benefits of doing that. Talking about the benefits, that's where you come in with your wonderful example of your wonderful solution. And because you've understood the requirements, you've shown all the existing challenges, your solution then very quickly fits into solving that problem for them. This is also the point at which you admit which problems it doesn't solve, potentially. So if, and this is particularly important in a research capability, is making sure you put the bounds and limitations on that, because this is real life. It's not the Jungle Book. You don't have the complete story, and sometimes it's not always a happy ending. But for the purpose of this, it has to be that you're solving their problem, but you do have to be honest and upfront about where the future research will be required, whether future partnerships or needs will be required, and the next stages. You say it in a positive way, but you identify them. And then really where you're falling down from the story is putting everything else in place. So it is absolutely about your project plan to deliver this, very, very clear and easy to read, about the cost being at the right level. There's a debate in that, but, you know, understanding what the cost is acceptable to them, that it makes it very easy for them to say, yes, they need to do this. And then the evidence of previous delivery and the compliance is really the final ticks. And by compliance, I mean that wider social issues that we'll talk about in a bit. And that's the conclusion. And how could they possibly not go for that? Because you've presented it in such a way that it makes it very easy for them to do. And because you've thought it through, it's very clear to you that what you've got is absolutely what they need. Okay, so top tips. These are some of the things that we sort of say on repeat. The first one is always, always, always call the customer. So when you find an opportunity, you've identified it's a good idea, you've done that initial bit of thinking, the contact that is on there, always call them every time. Even if you think you know exactly what they want and what they want to do, and you've spoken to them before, call them again. Because this is really an opportunity to make sure that when your bid lands, they recognise it and understand it, and they've already had a conversation about what you've got to offer and how that fits with what their needs are. And it's your opportunity to get as much information out of them as you can. You might not get much, you might not at all, I'm afraid, but it is always worth a little bit of a go, and about making yourself known and putting a friendly face on the end of what becomes a document. The other thing in same line of that is thinking a little bit about how you're going to communicate and market yourself during this process. If it's a really big bid, this could be going on for quite a long time, and you might want quite a comprehensive comms program to go with it. It might be a short, quick win thing, and it might just be a case of a few conversations and making sure you mention it when you see people at events or in virtual events. But really have a think about what's appropriate and just consider it, whether it's light touch or whether you need something wider to smooth the process. The other thing is partnerships are good, really, really good. They fill your gaps, they fill your weaknesses. So when you're going through the process of understanding how your solution fits, you will be identifying where you have gaps and where you need help. And that is where you should have partners. Now, ideally, you'd be working on those as part of your roadmaps anyway. So where you are now, you'll have identified those partners beforehand as to what you need. You know, do you need a manufacturer to work with in order to produce what you're creating, or a paint supplier or something else? To have identified all those things early on will make this easier. But they add strength to your bid, so work in partnerships. The other thing is talking in their language, and this is an audience thing. So if you're writing to them, you absolutely still use clean and plain English, but use defence language so that they understand exactly how your technology fits into it. That requires an understanding of the application and the technology application. So if you're quite sort of if your technology is very specific, you will have to do some thinking in terms of understanding the full application of what it's going to be used for, the threats and all that kind of thing, so that you use the right stuff. But it's worth putting some time and effort into that. The other one, and that's why we do what we do, is to get the appropriate level of technical detail. So don't oversimplify it. Quite often you're putting bids into very, very knowledgeable people, but don't make it difficult for them to understand. So having the right level of technical detail offers credibility, but if it's very badly presented or poorly explained, you're making their job very difficult, which leads me on to my next point, that diagrams are your friend, and you should aim to present lots of your information within it. You then don't have to repeat it, so it makes use of the way you've got word count limitations and things like that. Putting it in a diagram gives you an opportunity to communicate something without eating up valuable words. And most people are fairly visual, and that will just help put things into context for them. using examples and really credible context is also my next point. You might have never worked, seen the environment in which soldiers or sailors or airmen are working in, and having some knowledge and some really credible contact of understanding how they use their weapons, how they use their kit, what they're doing in a day-to-day basis will allow you to tell how your solution fits within that in a credible situation. Because as I've heard from lots of people, and includes, I'm actually married to somebody in army capability, one of his biggest gripes is that people suggest solutions and they don't actually realise how people are going to use that at the end of the day, and the problems with it, and that use when you're being fired at, running away, doing whatever else, going towards the enemy, that just isn't going to work. So that is really important. The evidence behind it, we've talked about this a bit, but this is absolutely backing up your previous deliverables in other markets if you don't have them in defence before. And if you haven't done anything like this before, it's all about the expertise in your team. So it might be a new experience. You might well be bringing in people in order to fill that gap. Make sure you tell them how you're going to do that and why you're going to do that, and just pad out that picture so you alleviate any concerns or risks or worries that they might have in that process. And the other one is a very important one, because I think we've probably all made this mistake before, but don't leave submission to the last 5 minutes, because and it sounds so silly, but so many people do it, because inevitably things get pushed to the last minute. The platform may or may not stay open and working, and also it just adds a little bit of extra stress that you don't need in your life. So make sure you put in a block in your diary to give you some significant time to put it in well before the last 5 minutes. And they're the things we repeat most. So hopefully some of that will resonate, and will give you an opportunity to get that right in the future. The final one really is to give them absolutely no reason to say no. And there are some brilliant talks today, rather conveniently, that cover many of these issues. These are just examples, but Dan's already gone through a lot of these things just before this now, which will give you some food for thought. You've got Chris and Cam later, I think, we're talking about cyber stuff, and then Andrew's talking later about the wider social value ESG type stuff, which is really, really important and a key factor in how government is deciding to procure. Make sure that you've thought about all these things before you submit the bid, well before ideally, so that you don't give them any reason to not say yes to you. Because it'd be silly to lose it on something like that, which you could have fixed well ahead of time. Right, that was quite a quick whistle-stop tour as far as I'm concerned of bidding, but hopefully it just gives you a bit of an idea as to how you can change your approach and be a little bit more successful by telling a cohesive story. Yeah, I think that's it. Thank you very much for listening. I'd love to hear some of your experiences or questions, or you can moan and groan if you want to, or suggest some other things that you found particularly useful to add to the discussion. It'd be great to hear.
Thank you very much, Lindsay. That was really interesting. I have recorded this this presentation, and it will be sent out to everybody at the end of the event. Probably tomorrow or the day after. If you've got any questions, then you can contact Lindsay via swap card, make connections, or have a video meeting with her. I think is that it, Lindsay?
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much then.
Thank you. Right, is that okay?
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much.
No worries.
Okay. All right, take care. Bye.